Welcome everyone. Sorry for the bit of the abrupt end of at least one conversation that I was involved in there, but they were using that conversation to insult me, so I don't feel too bad about that in particular. Welcome everybody to the June JavaScript and Ruby meetup. It is the first meetup before we go on a bit of a hiatus. As long time kind of attendees will know that the JavaScript and Ruby meetups usually kind of take a break for the summer months while they are, everyone's kind of out and about. Your own lives are so much more interesting in JavaScript than JavaScript and Ruby, especially in summer. And so people take vacations. And so we'll see everybody in September. What this means, you'll hear this a little bit later, that this is the perfect time to do a talk if you haven't done one before. This would be a phenomenal time to develop a talk over the summer. I know that myself and the other organizers would be happy to help you work through your topic. I know at least one person in the audience has promised me a talk in the past. You know who you are. And they better deliver over the summer months so that we have some really good content to come back to in September. But we actually have some really cool stuff to talk about in June as well. So let's get to things. First of all, I'm going to share my screen. In the past, it hasn't really worked. Google Slides. There we go. There we go. Aha, it works. Cool. Do we have... Oh, God, you can see my cursor. The last time I did this, I had to unshare and reshare to go between slides. It was awful. So quick agenda here. Code of conduct, news, then talks. Then we'll have some time to socialize in the tables in Remo later on. We try and keep some time at the end for socialization for people to talk. I know there's a few people here who have seen each other haven't seen each other in a long time, so we'll try and give you some time to chat and stuff. If we find that chats are going particularly long, we can always start up a Jitsi, which is just a quick kind of video call for people to continue that kind of socialization happening. All right, so into the actual agenda. By attending this meeting, you agree to our code of conduct. It has a long kind of it has a lot of detail in it. I will link it in a second. I suspect someone is already linking it, rendering me typing into this window obsolete. Nope, not yet. I will link it in a second once I get through this. Basically, the code of conduct is try and be good to people, try and be understanding, realize that this should be a safe place for everyone. And that means that just kind of don't be a dick to anyone for any reason. Try and be supportive as well. Try and make sure that this is a welcoming community that actually wants to have people in it rather than something that's insular or cliquey. A big part of that is also being open. So, be kind, be patient, and be awesome. Try and make sure that we have, there we go, Abram's got it. Try and make sure that we have only the best experiences for anyone who's coming out here, especially if it's your first time out, in which case, welcome. If it's your first time out, we normally would in person, which almost is 3 years ago at this point, which is starting to get depressing. We would wear these little yellow little stickers on our name tags that would let you know that that person is able to be chatted up about anything. If there's someone who's new to the community or new to the meetup, we would have these little yellow stickers that would call out, hey, I'm friendly. I won't look at you weird if you ask me a dumb question. And I will volunteer to be that person. I know that some of the other organizers in the chat will definitely do that as well. We want this to be a welcoming community. So if you have any dumb questions, just ask me. You can kind of put them in the chat or you can message me on the Slack. Hey, welcome. We have a first timer. Welcome, Bryce. I'm going to call you up to the stage and ask you. No, don't worry about that. We're a comfortable environment for first timers. So feel free to ask questions here. I think everybody else is a little bit more veteran than you in the communities. So let us know if you have any questions. Additionally, we also have channels that help back up this meetup, Meetup-Ruby and Meetup-Exchange.js on the Slack. Both of those channels are reasonably well trafficked, and you can kind of ask Ruby and JavaScript questions in there, especially if you have something that you're kind of trying to work out. We can help you out with that. You will be on YouTube. We've been doing really good at recording our talks the last couple of months and getting them up on YouTube. So we have a DevEdmonton YouTube account, which we will link in the chat later, where you can kind of see past meetups, scroll through previous talks that were given, that sort of thing. It contains talks from the variety of meetups that are currently happening in Edmonton, which is most commonly ours and the Python meetup. And if you ask a question, just be aware that might be right out on YouTube. We don't edit these at all. So please try and make sure that you have some level of decorum when you're asking questions. We don't want to have anything bad show up on our YouTube channel. All right. Talk about news. So the big news is, I think, on the Ruby side of things, which is that Shopify is investing in Ruby at scale. Shopify is one of the bigger platforms that's using Ruby at a large scale. And now they're getting big enough that they want to take that engine that's powering their applications and start to really develop it. They're running up against the edges of what you could accomplish with Ruby, and now they're trying to expand the language itself to try and figure out how they can actually redevelop their software and their services, which is super interesting. As well, in really interesting news, the 2022 Ruby on Rails survey results were released. I haven't dug into that yet myself, but I am eager to learn what people are thinking about this wonderful language. On the JavaScript side of things, we're going to start with a security update on a massive attack that happened via NPM. I would encourage everybody to read about that. It was really interesting. The NPM stuff was pretty in-depth, not quite as in-depth as maybe I wanted it to be, but it's a good look behind the curtain as to what happens when there is a security hole or an attack like that. Much more promisingly, React, an NPM, a vulnerability. Yeah, exactly, Karl. Like, who would have thought that this thing that is barely held together with baling wire and painter's tape would actually maybe have some security holes in it? I guess we didn't learn our lesson the one time that guy threw a fit and brought down half the internet by changing a string library. If you remember that from about 4 years ago. And then, of course, there was a new hook being potentially added into React, use event, which is really interesting. For such an event-driven framework, it seems like a natural fit to have something that's explicitly event handling. And then, of course, it wouldn't be JavaScript news coming from me if we didn't have at least something TypeScript related. I really should have a TypeScript shirt at this point I can wear while I'm evangelizing. But TypeScript 4.7 was released. All right. So this is the part of the intro presentation where I talk to you about DevEdmonton. What's DevEdmonton? It's the name that's underneath me right now. It's a loose conglomeration of developers trying to push ahead development at Edmonton for any person, whether you're a company that uses developers or you're an individual looking to break in. We're trying to help support anyone who self-identifies as a developer or uses development services at all. So it's just a conglomeration of developers trying to make things better. You can find the website over there. There is a Slack, which is really cool. It's where most of the stuff gets organized. We'll talk about organization in a second. You can get answers to questions. You can find mentorship opportunities. You can chat about the latest thing. You can find hot memes and politics talk. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's happening there. It's probably going to get a little bit quieter as it comes into the summer months, but check out DevEdmonton. It is a fantastic place to be, and it has made all of this stuff possible, which is really cool. Our next meetup, as mentioned, we will be taking a bit of a break over July and August. Surprise, surprise, no one wants to be here when it is 30 degrees and sunny and someone can go to a beach instead. So our next meetup will be September 1st, 2022. It is the first Thursday of every month, and it just so happened the first Thursday in September is the first day in September. So we will see all of you on the 1st of September. Don't worry, meetup's not over. We still have plenty of stuff to get to. Just wanted to let you know when the next one is. The last thing to mention before we kind of get into talks is to talk about speakers and organization. So the lifeblood of these meetups are the amazing people who come up with amazing presentations to educate us all about something weird in JavaScript or Ruby, or to show off a new library, or to demo something that they've built. If you feel like you want to give a talk on something, just let us know either by joining on the Slack and being like, hey, I want to, give a talk. I don't think you can say the words, I'd like to give a talk, without an organizer finding you within 10 seconds. So we're pretty good at that. You can also go to exchange.js.com/talks. There is a Yeg Ruby part as well, which I don't remember. And Yeg Ruby's website, I think, is currently down. So we'll put that in the chat once we kind of dig that up. But you can also just post in the chat or get in contact with an organizer, and they will find you and help you along with your talk. Organizers in the chat currently would be myself, Ian, Andy Statistician, and Abram Hindle in the chat as well. So you can reach out to any of us and we will definitely get you sorted. That being said, we also want people to help us present and help us put on these things. It's not a lot of work to do to put these on, but you'd be surprised how much the same work for 4 or 5 years in a row every month can kind of wear on you. In the COVID era, we've seen a lot of kind of attrition of organizing groups, and that's the reason why it's a JavaScript and Ruby meetup, because we previously had a JavaScript one and a Ruby one. but the organizers for both kind of fell out of practice with it. They just had other things to do. So if you like what we do here, I would encourage you to reach out to one of our organizers and volunteer your time. It's probably less than an hour a month, to be honest, but it'd be nice to have some backup as well. All right. So I don't see any questions in the chat. That is the end of our preamble, which means it's time for our talks. I have a level with you, 100% forgotten whose talk I put first. So let's find out together who is going to be giving. I want to say it's Karl. Is it Karl? Oh, questions. Yes. Okay, cool. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the Remo off to the right-hand side. There is a Q&A section that your questions will get kind of filtered in. Just click on that. You can add your questions. For anyone who's doing presenting, if it's immediately applicable, if it's something that we kind of need the context of what's on screen to ask, I will pop back into the chat and I will ask you that question right away. If it's something that can be delayed to the end, if it's like general advice, I will collate those and we'll go through them at the end of your talk. All right, I was right. It is Karl. So I will attempt to welcome Karl to the screen here. Karl, you can turn on your camera or your microphone. Can I summon you beneath me? Oh, it's working. It's working. That's Karl.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine. I am going to stop sharing my screen and I will pass things over to Karl, who's going to talk to us about an introduction to metaprogramming in Ruby.
Yeah. Okay, one second.
Karl gets his talk set up. I will tell dad jokes. So keep that as motivation for to get it to talk up quickly. When is a joke a dad joke?
Okay, I have to quit and reopen Chrome, so I will be right back.
All right, thanks, Karl. Yes, yeah, exactly. What do you get if you cross a dad joke with a rhetorical question? You know, I really like to give Sidewalks a shout out for keeping me off the streets. If you think I'm running out, I have a 400-line dad joke repository in my notes. You know, I've recently been diagnosed as colorblind. It's good to share. It really it came out of the purple for me. Just really surprising. I laugh at my own jokes because nobody will. Oh, we have new Karl.
Okay. Okay, that looks to be mostly working.
That looks perfect. I'll jump out.
Yeah, so my name's Karl. I'm a site reliability engineer at Jobber. Yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about metaprogramming in Ruby. Yeah, so what is metaprogramming? So it's a confusing concept, but basically it's programming about programming, or you can kind of think about it as writing code about writing code. But in Ruby, what it is the ability to modify already existing objects, classes, and modules dynamically at runtime. Yeah, so that'll become a bit more clear as I show some examples. Yeah, as I said, it's a pretty confusing concept. It's one of those things, if you think you understand metaprogramming, you probably don't actually understand it as well as you think you do. But it's also can be very powerful. Yeah, and you have to use it wisely. Once you learn a bit about metaprogramming, it's easy for it to become your new favorite tool in your toolbox. But it, like everything, has a time and a place. Yes, this just kind of shows that as you learn more, you start kind of using it for everything, and it doesn't make sense to always use. There's some obvious and good times to use it, and you want to be careful that you're using it in those times. Yeah, so the probably simplest example, and maybe one that people, if you write a lot of Ruby, you might be most familiar with, is what's called monkey patching an existing class. And so what that means is in Ruby, at any time you want, you can basically reopen an already existing class and add methods to it, redefine methods, kind of do what you want to it. Yeah, so I'm just gonna switch my screen share to this one. Yeah, and so if I run this example, yeah, you'll see, so I made, let me open it up. I made a string, and then first you do s.uppercase, and it does what you would expect. It puts it all into uppercase letters, but then I reopened the string class, and I redefined uppercase to actually be downcase. So now when you say s.uppercase, you actually get the downcase. Yeah, and so that just shows that you really have to be careful when you're doing metaprogramming and reopening classes like this, because it can easily get you in trouble, especially if you're reopening a class that's part of the standard library, like a string, or yeah, if your team is not aware that you have this monkey patch, and then all of a sudden a class that they expect to behave one way is behaving a different way, can lead to some really nasty behavior and nasty bugs. Yeah, so back to slides. Yeah, so next example is just the respond to method. And this basically does kind of what you would think from the name. It just asks an object, will you respond to this method I send you? And if it's able to, then it will return true. If it can't, then it returns false. Yeah, so I'll show the demo that I have for that. So yeah, if you run that code, you get true if you pass it method A, because as method A defines on it. You get false if you pass it method B. Yeah, so that's respond to. Yeah, and so now for something a little, oh, sorry, my slide is cut off a bit. Something a little more interesting, runtime method creation. And so what this does is it uses the method missing method, which is just a method on a class where if it, you try and invoke a method on it, if that method doesn't exist, eventually you'll fall through into method missing. And by default, I believe it just does nothing. And so you get an exception saying this method doesn't exist. But if you want to, you can define your own method missing and put in whatever kind of behavior makes sense. So that could be you just log something which says this method doesn't exist, or if you want to get a little more wild, you can combine it with the define method, which again does what it says. It defines a method on a class. You can actually dynamically define methods at runtime. So if we run this code, yeah, you can see, so you call foo.new.do something, and that method do something that's not defined. So we found a method missing, and then we just log that method doesn't exist. But with bar, what we actually do is we are catching that there's not a method, and we're dynamically just defining the method. And this block here, the do puts end, that will actually be like the method body. And so let me just hop into console. And yeah, so here, if I define these here, and then I say like, we create a new bar object, and then we call yeah, so now whenever we call do something, it'll just calls this method, and if we actually look at it, we can see that yeah, it's actually a method defined on the object like anything else. And if we create a new bar, this new object also has the do something method defined. Yeah, so that's dynamically created a method at runtime. And then now it's a method like anything else. You can use it, you can pass arguments to it, and treat it like any other method. Okay, so class eval and instance eval. I just linked a gist with the code example, but here, I'll just pull it up on the screen here. Yes, class eval and instance eval, they're confusing because they basically do the opposite of what they say. Yeah, so here we're creating a class called foo, and then we're calling class eval on it, and then we're passing a block and we're defining the method. But what this is going to do is it's actually going to create an instance method, whereas here we're calling instance eval, and then we're defining the method. But this is actually going to create a class method. So as I said, yeah, these basically kind of do the opposite of what you would expect. You would think that instance eval would create an instance method and class eval would create a class method. But yeah, so for that reason, they've fallen out of favor a little bit because they're confusing. But here, just to demonstrate, let's pop this into console, a new session. Yeah, so now if we do, you can see class method on the foo class, but also if we create a new object, there's also an object method on it. Or an instance method on it, I should say. Yeah, and so class eval and instance eval are sort of different ways to do the class less than idiom, which if you've been around Ruby long enough, you've probably seen this idiom here. Yeah, so what this does is it creates a new class method on foo. So that's the equivalent of what we did here with instance eval. But if you have an existing object, like an existing instance of a class, you can also use that idiom to add a method to it. Yeah, so this created an instance method, which exists on the instantiated object of class foo, whereas this created a class method, which you can call in the class itself. Yeah, and this here is basically the equivalent of doing class eval. Yeah, so they're both ways of kind of dynamically reopening an object and adding methods to it. Just depends what scope you want. Do you want a class method or do you want an instance method? Yeah, so now hook methods. So in Ruby, there's a set of what are called hook methods that get fired at runtime when certain events happen. The most notable ones are included, extended, prepended, and inherited. Yeah, so I have a code example here. So what we've done is we've created a module, and then we've just defined the included, extended, and prepended hook methods. Yeah, so here we're including this foo module in this class bar. So that will fire off this method. Here we're prepending it to a class, so that will fire off this method. Yeah, and then here we're extending it. So as you expect, that'll fire off this method. And then there's also the inherited method, which is called when a class is inherited by another class. Yeah, so here we'll fire off this inherited hook. So if we run this, yeah, so you can see, so the included method fired, the prepended method fired, the extended method fired, and the inherited method fired. Yeah, and what's interesting here is you'll notice there's not really like a main class, or sorry, a main like main runtime logic. So like we never actually instantiated anything. All we're doing is we're defining modules and classes and methods, and then running them through the Ruby interpreter, and yet things are still happening. So keep that in mind for later. Yeah, so a more practical example. Yeah, so the problem we're going to try and solve with some metaprogramming is if we want a module that we can just include in an arbitrary class. And once we include it in that class, then by default, we'll just get runtime information logged to output for all methods of that class. So there's a number of ways you could accomplish this, but one way you can do it in Ruby using metaprogramming is what I've done here. So I've defined an instrument module, and I'm using the included hook method. Yeah, so when this module is included, what we're going to do is on whatever class it's included in, we're going to reopen that class, and then we're going to use another hook method, which is method added, which, as the name suggests, is fired every time a method is added to an object. And so whenever a method is added on this class, we're actually basically going to redefine it. And so what we're going to do is first we'll check that we haven't instrumented it before, just to avoid getting into this infinite loop of instrumenting methods we shouldn't be instrumenting. And so then we'll alias it. So when you call method A, we're actually going to end up, or actually when we call instrumented method, we're actually going to call method. And then we're going to redefine that method to basically wrap it. So we'll get the start time, and then we'll call the aliased version of that method. And then we'll get the finish time, and then we'll just output the difference. Yeah, so you can see here, made a class, included that module. Now here I'm just going to instantiate 2 objects and call methods, and let's see if this works like I hope it will. Yeah, and it does. So you can see called foo.new.method A. Oh, sorry. Should make bigger for you all. Yeah, so called foo.new.method A, and we can see it took 3 and a bit seconds because we did do some printing beforehand, and then method B, which just sleeps for 5 seconds, took 5 and a bit seconds. Yeah, so that's a bit more of a practical example. Yeah, but it's easy to, so as I say, this works, and it's a somewhat elegant way to do this, but going back to what I mentioned at the beginning, where it's easy to confuse yourself with metaprogramming. Like if something went wrong with this module and all of a sudden you debug it, and now you're dropped into this module, which is using this included runtime hook, and then it's redefining methods on the fly. It's easy to get confused about what is actually going on. And so this does work. It could be a challenge to debug. Yeah, so that's one of the trade-offs of using metaprogramming is that it isn't necessarily the most understandable code unless you really are familiar with metaprogramming techniques. Okay, so a brief explainer of how this works. So basically, Ruby is an object-oriented language. What that means is that everything in Ruby is an object, including classes. And what I mean by that is, so this thing here, this class, this is actually a runtime object of type class. So I'm going to pop open the interpreter just to demonstrate that. So if you define some class, and a class actually has a class, its type class. And so I know that sounds a little odd to think about because generally we think of classes not as actual concrete like things that exist at runtime, but basically as abstract kind of representations of behavior that we want to exist in our system. Yeah, but in Ruby, when you type class, whatever, the interpreter will actually instantiate an object of type class, and then you can interact with it. Yeah, so you can, because classes, whoops, no, go back. Because classes are just objects, they can be manipulated and interacted with at runtime like anything else because, whoops, because they're just another object. And the same, I didn't say this here, but the same is true for modules. So like if we create module, yeah, that's just an object of type module. Yeah, and if we look at the, yeah, so it's, yeah, so interestingly, the module, the type of the module class is actually class. So a module under the hood is also a class. And a class will have superclass like everything else. Yeah, so superclass of a class is module, which is a bit weird to wrap your head around, but we don't necessarily have to dive down that rabbit hole today. Yeah, so every class also has what's called an Eigenclass, which is it's an invisible class which is unique to each object. Yeah, the Eigenclass, it's a class like any other, can have variables and methods. And so an interesting property of this, or interesting result of this, is that class methods are actually just instance methods of the Eigenclass. So to demonstrate that, let's reopen this, and then yeah, so if we go, yeah, that worked like I wanted. Yeah, so we can see, yeah, so this this instantiation of this foo object, if we just look at what it is, it's an object of type foo, so foo is its class. But if you look at the Eigenclass, it's it's basically this class object, which we had that it's class object which is kind of attached here to this foo object. And so the Eigenclass, because it's just a class, again, it's just an object of type class, but it will be unique to every basically every object will have a unique Eigenclass. Yeah, so as I said, when you make a class method, what you're actually doing is an instance method of the Eigenclass. So to demonstrate that, let's just define something here. Yeah, so if we go, yeah, so that's a class method. But if we look at actually, wait a minute, this worked for okay. Well, I'm not going to debug that now, but basically what I wanted to get was for this class method to show up as an instance method of this Eigenclass, but I forget exactly the hoops you have to jump through to get that to show. But one of my linked articles shows it. Yeah, so I'll just pause. Are there any questions?
I don't think there are any questions in the chat so far, so I think you're good to go.
That's pretty much what we'll talk. Yeah, so let's open it up for questions, I guess.
Cool. Wow, thank you very much. It was a very clear understanding of some of the weirdness that can happen in Ruby. You can use some of that same weirdness with JavaScript as well. Anything that's kind of a prototype by default language. You can have some.
Yeah, I think Python can. I think you can do similar things in Python also.
Yeah. You don't have to redefine many methods to bring the whole thing down like a house of cards if you really want to be destructive. But it's really gives that flexibility. We were talking earlier in a room about how lots of these languages have had amazing things built on them because they're so flexible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see that we have a question in the chat. So just to clarify, is class underscore method equivalent to most languages static method?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, cool. Well, I will mark that as answered, and I will vamp for approximately 10 seconds to allow any other further kind of questions to come in. And also, if Abram is eating something or otherwise indisposed to hear this and come back to his computer and be ready for his talk. I am not seeing anything. Karl, thank you so much for your talk. It was wonderful. If people want to gain access to these further reading bits, maybe could you grab these and throw them into the chat? That way people can kind of click through a lot
Yeah,
more.
for sure.
Yeah. All right. So I will share my screen. We will see that in a second. Aha, here we go. So next up, we have Abram, who's going to talk about what? Python. This is a web meetup. Abram, what are you doing here? What manner of awful thing are you going to do as I summon you from beneath me?
Well, we're going to talk about the wonders of WASM enabling Python in the browser.
Yeah, can't wait for this talk. All right, Abram, I'll let you get on to it then.
Okay. All right, cool. So I shared, should be able to see my screen now. I shared the tutorial. So essentially what Pyodide is it's basically Python in the browser with WebSockets. So let's just go to network and let's just refresh this. So we can see it asks for jQuery, asks for jQuery terminal, some Unix formatting thing to make it look like a terminal, asks for Pyodide, and then it downloads a big honkin' 2 megabytes of Python. And then we get ourselves a Python emulator. So we can go something like import sys, we can go sys version, we got ourselves a Python. And we saw they used LLVM because obviously they're WASMing it. So that's kind of neat. So you got Python right in the browser. You can also install things if you want. You can go like micro pip. I got to import it first. They provide micro pip and you can actually just download stuff. So if I go x equals import micro pip install, and then I ask it to install something like, say, NumPy, which is probably huge. This is probably a bad idea. We can see that it's not running. Task finished. Okay, did it whine? I don't see it. Loading oh, it looks like it got NumPy. Maybe NumPy's out of the box. So let's just import NumPy right now. Okay. NumPy arrange 10. Yeah, so now we got NumPy and we got NumPy arrays. So we could just ask for their shape. Pretty neat. So this is just the REPL, right? I will share with you the REPL if you want to play with it. Megabytes, you could fit it on a high density floppy. You could push them. Works. Okay, so you should see my screen again. If you don't see my screen, complain. So let's go back to the tutorial. I'm going to serve the tutorial from my own computer, but you can do it from my GitHub page that I shared with you. So let's just click on Hello World. We got Hello World. It says press the button. Let's open the inspector and let's just go to network. Let's refresh this. Refresh. It asks for pyodide.js. That's about it. I'll make this maybe easier. Well, that's about as good as it's going to get. I'm going to click Hello World. It goes and gets 2 megs and it says Hello World. Now you're like, Oh, that's really impressive. I'm glad you showed us that. That's meaningful. Okay, I get it. Let's go look at the source code. We got ourselves a nice web page that even has meta headers that aren't totally right. But nonetheless, we got ourselves some bad JavaScript where we've got an onclick that calls actual JavaScript, calls hello world. Our JavaScript is right here. And we can see that we've got hello world. So we write loading Pyodide, and then we await for load Pyodide, which we got from Pyodide itself. This is an instance of Pyodide, probably the module. And then we can run Python. So this is not quoted very well, but really what it's saying is take the array hello world, join it on a space, and just have that as the value, the final value of the interpreter, and give me the string. Send it to the console log and send it to status. So we go to console, click hello world. I don't know why it complains about it. Probably because it already loaded Pyodide. Loading Pyodide. Okay, if I click hello world again, it freaks out because I told it to load Pyodide and it says Pyodide is already loading. Okay, so we can now run basic Python in the browser just by including where the Pyodide JavaScript that's delivered on a CDN, and then we can just run Python. So that's kind of nice. So let's go back and let's look at the second example. Actually, if you got any questions, I'll just check right now. Nope. Okay. Let's go look at the eval example because the eval example is more fun. So here we've got import sys. We make a list. We concatenate some stuff to the list for no good reason. And then we have a string as our last value. So if I go eval, we can see that we are indeed running 3.10, which is a higher version than what I'm running on my Ubuntu right now. And we get to see the endian, it's little endian. We get to see some of the copyright statements, all that fun stuff. That's cool. So we can do just about, any Python that we want to do, right? You can write a function, right? Where, we could just return 2 times x, and then you could just do something like dup 600. Right? Pretty simple, pretty easy. So what is that source code? Let's take a look at that. It's not much harder. All right, so we've got ourselves a text area. That's going to be our editor. You got the evaluate button. And what does the evaluate button do? All it does is it just calls Pyodide, run Python, and it just gets the code and just runs it. So code is a string, and then the last value, it will return it, and then we just console log it. What do we have to do before that? Well, we loaded Pyodide, and then I kept a reference to it, and that was about it. So the general use case, wait for Pyodide to load. Then once Pyodide loads, you can start evaling Python, and you can run Python synchronously, or you can run Python asynchronously, and you can just eval code, which is kind of neat, but that's not necessarily how you really want to run Python, right? You don't want to keep just giving it a string to eval, but nonetheless, it is what you can do. And based on the Pyodide documentation, it is what they kind of expect you to do a lot of the time. Now, you might have heard of PyScript. PyScript is built on top of Pyodide. It patches in a bunch of the rough areas of Pyodide, and it's probably definitely superior to what I'm showing you. But PyScript relies on Pyodide. So if you understand Pyodide before, then you're going to have a better time using PyScript. Because really, what Pyodide is it's just a WASM Python interpreter that's got a bunch of nice kind of JavaScript interaction libraries, as well as a nice JavaScript API. But it's not enough. And that's why I think Anaconda promoted the PyScript library, which is on top of Pyodide. Okay, But nonetheless, you can take in text, you can run it. I'm going to see if anyone wants me to run anything in particular. There's a comment, makes the web more accessible to another array of devs. It's really interesting because if you have a tool, right, that's a command line tool, you can now deploy it on the web. You can basically give a Python command line tool a little JavaScript HTML interface, and now it's runnable. And it's all in the user's browser, and they can stay local too, which is kind of nuts. So I think it's really neat. All right, back to the show. So we can run whatever we want. Unfortunately, if we try to say import something that's not there, say, which is quite useful, we're going to run into the problem of it's just not going to work. Because it's going to complain no module named say. Okay, well, I could try to do micropip and maybe I can get by with this. This might work. I doubt it. We'll see. say. Then I got to move the import down. See if this one works. Nope. Doesn't like the await. I'd have to evaluate. The problem right here is I'm going run Python. I'd have to change this to run Python async. So if we want to do stuff like do HTTP requests, download pip modules, that kind of stuff in Python, we'll have to evaluate Python just a little bit differently. So let's go back and let's go to part 3 of the tutorial, micropip. All right, so let me go load up the micropip, and I'll go check the chat again just to make sure. I'm going to go check the chat. Oh, cool. Okay. So let's take a look here. So let's just run it first. So import micropip, await micropip install say, import say. Now, why do I type in await micropip install? Because micropip install, because we're JavaScript, we know it's basically a promise. In Python, it's called a future. JavaScript is promise. This means pretty well the same thing. So we're going to block while we install say. Not the best idea, but this all requires say anyways. So once we install say from pip, right? Because it's got to be a PyPy module. So like PyPy say. It's this module right here. You can pip install say yourself. So let's give this a good old eval. Await outside of function. Oh, because I'm on the wrong example. Okay, let's eval this one instead. Okay, so if we go down here, and we can now see the say says that, and we also have hello JavaScript and JS and Rubyists, and it's in say. So by default, when you call the print command, it will be it'll be to your console. So it's like console print, because it doesn't make sense to print in the browser unless you do something specific. But you do get to use say. You can't see anything?
No, we can see things just fine. We have a question from Warren here asking if this particular kind of method you're using to catch errors would be applicable in Python or JavaScript as like a fallback.
The console log?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this would, so I don't know if you print to standard error, if you're going to see it in the console log. I think that's a good question. I haven't tested that. But if you just do a print straight up, so let's go. It shows up in the console log. I'm going to go read the chat just to make sure I'm answering the right question.
It's the Q&A portion of it. It says, any idea if we can catch errors in Python this way or even JavaScript as a fallback?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that if you do run Python async, it then produces a promise. You can do your then and you can do your error, right? So you can catch it. and then it won't just be dying on console. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Warren, does that answer your question? Okay. It seems like that answers things.
Okay. And
we have a question from Karl as well, but I think that maybe we'll wait to the end for that one because that's more about
that's
Watson in general.
Okay, cool. All right. So that's kind of cool, but how do we get this to actually work? So let's go look at the source code again. This code is this code. We load up, we have script Pyodide, so we load that. We got our unclick evalit. Evalit is right here, and it goes, it's an async function now, and it awaits Pyodide run Python async. So with this, you can do all your error handling and everything, so you can catch your errors, and you can also, treat it like a promise, or you can, serialize it like that. And then we console log, we status it, and we're good. Do I have to do anything funny here? For micropip to work, it seems like you do actually have to tell Pyodide to load micropip. So once you load Pyodide, right? So we go load Pyodide, then what we're going to do is we're going to load the package micropip. And you can give it multiple packages, I think. And then once it's loaded, we'll run that and we'll get going. So if we go look back here, we're loading distutils. We got distutils, we're loading micropip, we're loading pyparsing, right? And then once we get here, we can import micropip, we can download and import Cause, and we can import Cause. So let's go take a look at the network stuff, because I think that's really interesting. So I'm just going to refresh my page. We can see that Pyodide is loading, right? And it says micropip is loaded, eval away. So if I click eval, for some reason it said undefined. Let's see, my console's freaking out. No. Network. All right, there's probably some dumb error. Okay, loading Pyodide, please wait. Micropip is loaded, eval away. So we're right there. Let's give this a shot. Eval. Okay, so Cause worked, but I suspect that it had cached it. All right, so we could always try something else. So let's see. So I know that one exists, and we can just import that, give that a shot. Okay, now it freaked out. Network error. All right. Just refresh, wait for it to load. Okay, eval. Eval encode, it died. Is it because I am on, is it cores? Oh, it's cores, because I'm asking for HTTPS. I'm not on HTTPS. Yeah. I should have ran HTTPS now. That's fine. I can go and do this on the GitHub example, and it should work just fine. So watch out for cores, especially cross mixing HTTP and HTTPS, which we all know we're not supposed to do. Okay, so we're good. I'll do Cause, eval encode. Just taking a sweet time. Okay, so it did that, and it's not showing us. Oh, that's, you know what? I had the wrong thing set. See, it went on and got the micropip wheel. It went and got pyparsing wheel, packaging wheel, and Cause wheel. So it goes out to Python's network and it goes and downloads that. So PyPy, they have pyhosted.org, which has cores turned off, which is pretty handy. So if you publish a Python module, you can micropip install it and have it loaded up in the browser, as long as it doesn't require some crazy C compilation. Pretty neat. So I'm glad that finally showed up. I had JavaScript clicked on and it wasn't JavaScript. Let's see. Or a Python runtime in JS. Okay, so what it is it's the actual Python runtime running in WASM, and then there's some JS wrapping around that, because every time you got WASM, you still have to have a JS interaction with it. WebSockets in Python, JavaScript. Yeah, you can do a lot of stuff, but I haven't tried WebSockets in Python with this. Also, the HTTP stuff is messed up because you can't open sockets, so you have to use their version called PyFetch to do your HTTP requests, and that can really mess up stuff and wreck some packages for you. Just be aware of that. All right. So we're back. We've got our Causa. We can see that it downloads Causa. That's cool. We can see that it downloads packages off this stuff. If you click stuff again or you refresh, so if we just go back here again, and I'll just go here again, you can see that once this is loaded, please wait. I am waiting. Okay. It takes a sweet time. So I go click eval. Oh, I've got cache disabled. That's why it's not cached. Anyways, the benefit is that instead of, let me just move this. You see that it says 17 megabytes, 7.8 megs transferred. If I just refresh again, you can see that most of this stuff is totally cached. So yes, you did download a bunch of junk, but it doesn't change that much. And it's got good caching headers, so it gets cached for you. And you can see everything here is all cached, right? Cache, 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 cache. We click eval. Wait as it goes and pips installs Causa and then runs it. It takes forever. And you can see even in this case, Causa was cached. So you could have 20, 30 megabytes of junk loading up, but it's not a huge hit, because if you expect them to use the website more than once, then they're going to have it cached. It's a huge waste if they only use it once, though. Big waste. You should also consider that if you use a lot of these whales repeatedly, that maybe you should host them yourself instead of forcing Python hosted to do it. Okay. Honors. Okay, Python WASM JS wrapper. Yeah, we're all good. All right. And probably the last example. So that was micropip. So what did I cover? You can eval strings. You can install stuff from pip, which is pretty complicated, which means you can also publish your own PyPy modules and have them pip installed in the browser. That's cool. But one thing we can do is we can load scripts. So here I'm loading Pyodide, and I'm waiting for it. It's Pyodide's really huge. That's 9 megs. And you can see here it asks for script.py. So we're going to copy the URL, and we're going to take a look at what script.py is. All right. I'll just show you what script.py is. Script.py is basically just a simple Python module that's got its basic imports, and then it's just got a bunch of functions in there. And what we can do is we can treat script.py as a module that we can import into our JavaScript Python runtime. Okay, so let's go to the loading script example. So this get image button, I'll show you the HTML for it. Get image button calls retrieve image. What does retrieve image look like? Let's just go take a look. Here's retrieve image. We say we're retrieving image, and then I ask for package save binary URL, turn wilderness canvas.png into save it as pic PNG. Okay, cool. But where did this save binary URL come from? Well, it came from the script. So it's right here. We can see that it's just Python code. and it gets a binary URL, and then it writes the data to disk. So your Python basically has the mscriptin file system. So anything you download, anything you pip install gets installed on the mscriptin file system, and you can write files to it arbitrarily. There's no real control over it. You just do whatever you want. So you can wreck everything or not wreck it, up to you. Now, in order to get that stuff, what I had to do is I had to import fetch from the JS module that comes with Pyodide, and then I had to fetch the result. I had to convert it into array buffer, and then I had to read it. So this is not JavaScript. This is all Python. That's pretty boring, pretty normal, but it will call upon like an XML HTTP request. So let's click Get Image. So I go Get Image, and you can see that it went and downloaded the image, or partially. I'm not sure why it's not showing up. So it got the image, and now we can get the image info. So if I click Image Info, and I wait, because the Python's not super fast to enter. I don't recommend high-speed interactions with Python between JavaScript and Python, because it's got to go into WASM and out of WASM, into WASM, out of WASM. And in many cases, it requires serialization, deserialization. So it says this is a pretty big PNG file, and 1024 by 1024. I can also get like if I click console, you'll see I can get a more JavaScripty representation of it, and it returns a map. So let's go get image info. So get image info just uses the PIL image library for Python, gets the image, returns a string. Get image info dict returns a dictionary, but we use the toJS function to deal with the fact that Python dictionaries can have keys of any type. So in order to return a Python dictionary to JavaScript, we can't return it as an object. So there is the map, and the map does have the entries that you need. And if you do get a map, you can always do from entries, right? So if I just go package, get image info dict, right? I need the name. It's called pic.png. All right, so I go get that info, and then if I want, I can just go object from entries X, and then I get myself a normal object if your stuff was strings. Okay, so we're calling in both of these cases, we're basically calling a pip module to load up an image from disk, and then we're getting information about it, and then we're returning it. And we're using these toJS functions to basically interact with JavaScript. Okay, so that is the start of that. But generally, when you're using Python in the browser, you want to send files, right? So, or you want to download files. So what you have to do is you have to engage in hokey ways to download files. So here I can click download image. And what happens is the JavaScript will go look at download image, and we'll see that I ask my package, the script, I ask it for this. So I get file in here. And basically in here, it basically turns a file to a buffer. I import the uint array type from JavaScript. I open the file, I read it, I create a new uint array, I assign the chunk, and I return it. So basically I'm returning uint array. So I get an array, and then I have to call some annoying JavaScript that I had to write. So download array, how does that work? Well, we make a blob, we give it a MIME type, we make a URL from that blob. This will be in memory. And then we make an anchor tag that has that URL, and we can give it a download name. We append the anchor tag to the body. We click the anchor tag, and then we remove it. Why do I do this? Well, because I searched really hard, and basically making an anchor tag was about the only way in JavaScript I could have it download the file with a meaningful file name. So it's really awful. I don't like it, but that's the JavaScript. Python side makes sense. Now you're wondering, well, you're running a script, so how did you do that? So let's go and look at there. To run a script, what I did in this case was I use pyfetch and pyodide. I get a local URL for the script. I pyfetch it, get the response. Once I've got the response, I write the script to script.py on the disk, and then I just load the module script. It's just like importing a .py file that's local. Once I do that using pyimport, it now represents the module as a JavaScript object, which means that everything defined in this file will be exported and accessible by a package. So now I can use package. So that's pretty fun. Another cool thing you can do is you can make images. So let's just see. Why is it complaining about that? What is actually running? Fine. We'll just reload. Okay. While it does that, I'm going to see if there's questions. Awesome. And the Q&A is fine. Okay. Okay, so we're back and I'm loading Pyodide. It says loading Pyodide, please wait. We wait because I think I hard refreshed. Yeah, it's downloading lots of stuff. Like it's got to get distutils. It downloaded the script. Okay. I think we're ready to go. We've installed our modules, or we're installing them. So you're not using Python on the web for performance, that's for sure. You're probably using it for developer performance in the sense that you already spent the time writing stuff. All right, so everything's ready to go. I can choose an image. So we'll choose this image. This is the green miner. I can download the image. And we can see that it's not a PNG file, so EOG is complaining. I can download a smaller version of it. So now it's resized at 255 by 255. And by doing much the same way as the download array, you can just show an image. So instead of making an anchor tag, I can make an image tag and just assign the URL. So blob or object URLs allow you to basically not have it hosted anywhere. It's basically hosted in memory. So if I keep clicking, it's basically just making new image and I'm downloading more of these things. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So just to review this example, what's happening is we're loading Pyodide, right? And then we're doing this dumb eval that I don't like, where we go and we fetch the script up high and save it. You could have used the XHTML request to go and grab it, or the fetch API, go and grab it and then save it. Up to you what you want to do. And then we save it to a Py file locally, and then we just tell Python to load it, and then we've got ourselves a nice JavaScript API that we can deal with. So anytime I call package like resize image or get file info, it goes and calls the script.py that I've got down here. And I don't have to do a lot of funny stuff on the Python side. Probably the most funny stuff I've got to do is maybe wrap IO to get standard out somewhere else. Other fun stuff is 2JS. So I don't have to do a lot, but maybe some of the async stuff is a little bit silly. Yeah. All right. So the last thing I want to show you is since I don't see any questions, is an example that I have an example I have of something that's of reasonable size. So this is Tiny Tina Wonderland Save Editor. So Tiny Tina Wonderlands is like a border. It's like a fork of Borderlands 3. It's like a AAA title, and this is a save editor for it. Basically, I forked the Borderlands 3 save editor and modified it to work with the Tiny Tina's game, so I didn't have to write much. I just basically stole a save editor. You can install it if you want. But what this does is this is a command line program in your browser. So this is a Tiny Tina Wonderland command line save edit. It's a command line program. And so what we do is essentially go and install everything that we need. So here it's installing Tiny Tina Wonderland command line save edit, and it's even going and getting Google proto buffers, because the files that you use, what is it, Gearbox, they save out the save file basically as a kind of encrypted Google proto buffers. So once you decrypt it, you now got a proto buffer, and then you can deal with it. So here I can click load example. It goes and downloads a file, an example save file, and then it goes and runs this Python module on it, and it will parse it out. And because I've got all this stuff open, it takes forever. Loading example. Nothing died yet, so it's still working. Oh, there we go. So it took that save file, and it tells you the character's name. It says where they can travel to. It says what missions they've completed, and it tells you what items they have and all this jazz. Anyways, at this point, I give you the options of downloading your save file, duplicating your save file, because you have to change the GUID for it to show up in the game. And you can have it unfinish your missions, or you can say add new items to the save file. And this is all done in the browser, and you don't communicate any of your save files or anything elsewhere. And so it lets people not install dangerous exes on their computer just to like cheat at video games, And I also, by doing this, you also can just basically make new save files and send them to the user, and they can download them. So that's pretty cool. Is it very fast? No, not when you've got the inspectors open. The inspectors really slow things down. But it is an example of sending across something pretty big and honking. Like, look at this. This is a 1 megabyte Python project. This is 150 kilobyte Python. We downloaded the save file there. We can see some of the output there. It looks terrible, but the point is that this was a command line program that would only like run on someone's Linux box, would probably not run very well on Windows. Now it's on the web, and anyone with a browser that's modern, like a Firefox or a Chrome, can go and run it. So easy to deploy. So that was my primary use case, basically just letting people not have a Linux VM to modify their save files. That's how I got into Pyodide. Yeah. All right. So thank you for your patience. I'll answer questions, I guess.
Amazing. Yeah, it's. I think we got kind of a turducken of coding stuff here, where it's one inside of another, and that's always fun to see. Do we have any questions for Abram? I think we answered a few, so I'm not sure what else there is,
Yeah,
but we'll give
true.
Standard couple of seconds for people.
Yeah, so I think the command line Python stuff is probably the big use case. Mm-hmm. So like if you can think of like localization stuff or some CSV modification, and you just need to do it now, but you want other people to use it or use it without having a Mac or Linux or having Python interpreter installed, yeah, it works.
Might also be something in like one of the Python web stacks as well, where like you want to give some access to Python scripting environments to people in like a hosted environment, but you don't necessarily want to have everybody have a terminal on their machine, right? Like I could see cases potentially similar to how like a Ruby console is often used for like a Rails console rather. Mm-hmm. So something like that.
So PyScript is basically meant to be like in-browser Jupyter Notebook. That
Yeah.
seemed to be their big motivation. Was they wanted the whole Jupyter notebook, they wanted scikit-learn, they wanted SciPy, they wanted all that right there in the browser with no funny business. So I did run into funny business problems. The original Borderlands 3 command line editor used LZMA compression, and that was not pre-WASM compiled. Even though it does come out of the box with Python, it was not available, and I don't think you could pip install it. So that was blocking me from running it in the browser. So what I do, I just switched to gzip. Luckily, it wasn't a hard requirement of reading the save files. It was only a data file problem, because there's a lot of data lookup and a lot of extra data that you download in order to do this, and you just keep it in your whale file. But nonetheless, the point is that some things won't work, and you will have to switch. You'll really try hard to switch to Python only solutions. So yeah. Also, you can call the JavaScript stuff too, which is really wild. So it means you can, for me, it means very nice UIs for Python instead of the questionable UIs that Python would allow. Yeah, so I think the browser is far superior user interface setup than what Python can offer you. So, all right, on that, let's see, Ruby.js meetup until we start running. Yeah, so everything's going to get all mixed up. It's going to have, stuff embedded in stuff. It's just the turducken, what you said is absolutely correct. Just layers upon layers, and it's going to be really slow.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it also points at like, hey, we're doing really cool things in the browser, right? So we're close to having browser as like a legitimate desktop environment, right?
Mhm.
So like we might see versions of Linux distros shipping with a web environment as the GUI as this thing gets like more advanced, because hey, as the browser gets crazier, like it's not unexpected to be able to run things in it. So yeah, there's some really cool stuff being built.
Yeah, we're going to see browser containers in the future. We know that. It's going to happen.
Yeah. Firefox OS. Yeah, great poll. Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, that's what Chromebooks are. It's essentially just Chrome, right?
That's
and
true.
At that point,
That's true.
we've got like a full desktop environment in there anyways. All right. Well, I have a few slides to get over. We have about 45 minutes left in our Remo. So I will share my screen. We'll get through it, and then we'll kind of dump ourselves into tables, and we can kind of chat however we want. I mentioned about the DevEdmonton Society. If that was all interesting to you, that's another thing that could always use more organizers. We have a meetup that happens the second Wednesday of every month. The next one coming up is next Wednesday, the 8th of June. There'll be a Google Meet link that you'll be able to find access to if you go to hashtag dev-edmonton-society on the DevEdmonton Society Slack. You can see all of the stuff that's happening there. Not much business happens. We're kind of entering a bit of a lull at the moment as summer comes around, though we are starting to think about planning a barbecue. So there might actually be outside, properly distanced, properly safe meetups in everyone's future. We've missed feeding people, I think, a little bit. Like I definitely have not had Dev Edmonton pizza in several months or several years at this point. And so we're looking at finding some way to bring the community back together. If that interests you, yes, we're all hungry. Warren, you are probably in your own home. I suggest you go and eat what I hope is food in your house. Don't eat chemicals, eat food, something healthy, some vegetables. Take care of yourself. Why don't you call anymore, Warren? That's basically what I'm asking. So yeah, check out the Dev Edmonton Society channel. There's lots of business happening there. And if you want to get involved, that's a fantastic place. Karl, I will need your address before I can send you a pizza. So jobs. Does anybody have any jobs they want to advertise? We can kind of invite people up to the stage. I'll go ahead and show for Jobber that we always have jobs that are available. If you check out our careers page, there is always something that you can apply for. Usually, I think we're looking on the more senior side of things, but there might be some other jobs available depending on what people are looking for. I don't see anybody volunteering jobs, so I'll move on to our sponsors. This doesn't happen for free. One of our biggest sponsors these days is Startup Edmonton. We'll get to it in a bit. But our first sponsor is PunchCard. They are a software consulting firm that does all different varieties of software consulting, doing document portals, web and mobile development. They're great. I used to work for PunchCard. They're fantastic. If you've been in the community long enough, you've probably at least met Eston. He's all over the place, so they're fantastic. Jobber, this is the place I currently work. Jobber does small business software. We write software for a wide variety of small business organizations. Oh yeah, go talk to Berm if you want to talk about PunchCard, because Berm works there too, or he works there currently rather. Jobber is pretty cool. We write small business software, for 5 to 50 people running a business and trying to employ their friends. A bunch of people that get together with a bunch of mowers and trucks or cleaning materials, and they end up creating businesses for themselves and lives for their families and everything else. It's really cool stuff. If you're interested, check it out. Next up is Iron Sights. They do, Jobber has a cool office. That is true. Lots of social media posts. Iron Sights is the next one, though. Iron Sights does oil field consulting. They do a wide variety of different applications. I think they're based in the Angular stack. They do logistics management, oil field equipment management. There's some really cool stuff being done at Iron Sights as well. And the last I mentioned at the beginning was Startup Edmonton. Startup Edmonton is a fantastic source. They provide this wonderful software that you can see all around me, over here and over here and over here and over there. They are the reason that we can they're the reason that we can use this wonderful software free of charge. They're very supportive of Edmonton businesses, especially Edmonton tech businesses. I know that a very few people have been launched to success through startups programs. It's always really cool to check them out. They also have a Slack, which I would recommend you go and check out because it's pretty bumping as well. If you'd like to sponsor us today, that'd be great. I'd say if you want to sponsor, maybe organize, because we're kind of doing okay with sponsors right now. But if you really wanted to get involved, email sponsors@exchangejs.com or get in touch with one of our organizers right now in the chat. That would be Abram, Andy, and myself. So if you want to talk to us about sponsorship, that'd be fantastic. You can kind of do it there. Next meetup, September 1st, 2022. That's in 2 whole months. So I hope everyone enjoys their summer vacation. Drink lots of beer if that is your drink of choice. If not, I wish you a cold/warm drink of whatever you are into, as it is applicable to your drink of choice. Try not to drink warm beer. Try not to drink cold tea unless you are trying to drink cold tea, in which case I can't stop you. I'm not your mom. Thank you, everybody. Good night. I'll see you around the tables. And thank you again for making another wonderful DevEdmonton JavaScript and Ruby Meetup happen. So thanks to our presenters, thanks to our organizers, and thanks to everyone else for watching. Bye.